We are going to get started now. We're going to finish up his presentation, starting with the Battle of Stalingrad. Okay.
Sorry about this. I have to continue my presentation. So, we're up to Stalingrad. Little recap. Taking Moscow failed, and so Hitler wanted them to take the oil fields in the Caucasus. So, basically, the German Sixth Army, which was commanded by General Friedrich Paulus, was suddenly ordered by Hitler to capture the city of Stalingrad, and strategically it had almost no importance. The argument was that the Germans needed to take a strategic position on the Volga River to prevent a sudden flank attack from the Red Army, but they could have done that at arguably any point. But guess what city just had to be sitting on the Volga River that just happened to have Stalin's name? And so Hitler, yeah, exactly. Hitler just wanted basically to take the city that was named after Stalin because why not? I'm an egomaniac. And of course, Stalin was determined to defend his own city, because why not? Egomaniacs. It was basically a proxy battle of two egomaniac dictators. And so I found this amazing. Stalin he issued an order that basically ordered his soldiers to not take one step backwards. Not one step behind the Volga. And if they would retreat, there would be military police behind them who would open fire on all those who would retreat. Talk about absolutely freaking insane. And, of course, the Germans of the Sixth Army were confident that they would, defeat the Soviets by the time the summer was over, because it was in the summer of 42 now. And once again, they didn't prepare for winter, which is something I forgot to mention last time, is that Hitler straight up did not allow his own army to prepare for winter. When his planners his planners for Operation Barbarossa directly asked him about it, and he straight up forbade them to even mention it. I really don't know why. Not preparing for Russia not preparing for winter when you're about to invade Russia. That's like, I don't know how to. That's like you want to go up against Michael Jordan, but you're not going to prepare for dunks. But anyway, so during the start of the battle, the Luftwaffe almost immediately reduced the whole city to ruin and rubble. But the Red Army used this as much to their advantage as possible, just hiding and digging in the ruins. And they got really up close and personal with the Germans to reduce the effectiveness of the Luftwaffe, because they wouldn't want to bomb their own soldiers. And the Soviet air forces were mostly decimated around this area, so they couldn't really fight back in the air. And Hitler was extremely impatient and wanted Paulus to capture the city real fast. But of course that wasn't going so well, and it got even worse when winter came around again, and the Red Army completely encircled them in the city, and the Germans were trapped in the city. Now, of course, they could have broken out of the encirclement, but Hitler had this crazy idea that whenever German soldiers captured an area of land, they had to hold it at all costs and could not retreat, so he ordered Paulus to make no attempts to break out. Instead, he had the Luftwaffe airdrop supplies in them. But this fell to crap too when the Soviets started taking all the airfields. And then the cargo planes would have nowhere to land. It's the middle of winter. And things just got worse and worse and worse. And finally, Hitler threw in his last attempt to keep him fighting by promoting Paulus to field general. Not field general. He promoted Paulus to field marshal, which was basically an order to fight to the death, because no field marshal from Prussia or any of the German states had ever surrendered before. But Paulus was the first one to do that and surrendered to the Soviets on February 2nd, 1943, and the soldiers of the German Sixth Army either surrendered or died. And this thing's not working. And that was this thing's not working.
Turn the switch on the side so it's green.
Okay.
Now try it.
And
See the airfield.
anyway, after that, the campaign to take the Caucasus quickly fell apart, and the Wehrmacht was once again on the retreat. And so, at this point, Hitler was so desperate for a victory like a major victory to regain the initiative because clearly the invasion of the Soviet Union was failing. And so his generals began looking for any place in the Red Army's line where they could attack and break the line. They almost did it at the city of Kharkov, but it wasn't enough. Until finally, one of his field marshals noticed a bulge in the Red Army's line around the city of Kursk that could possibly break the entire Soviet line in half if they busted it open right there. And so Hitler gambled nearly all remaining reserves to break the line at Kursk, proclaiming that a victory at Kursk will be a beacon for the whole world. And so, however, because of the intelligence of a deserter, the Red Army knew the attack was coming and prepared for it, and so they basically turned Kursk into a fortress with layers upon layers of trenches and artillery positions, and even at one point tanks buried up to their turrets. And so, finally in the middle of July, the German army attacked threw everything they had right at Kursk, and because they were numerically inferior, they were relying primarily on their panzer groups to smash through the defenses. And now this was a much different battle from Stalingrad, because Stalingrad had been a very slow and grueling, stalemate battle. This was a constant, fierce back and forth, counterattack after counterattack, assault after assault, as the Germans were just throwing everything they had to break the Soviet defenses, whereas the Soviets would just keep attacking back to regain lost positions. And it would go like, this town could be in German hands 1 hour and be in Soviet hands the next hour, and again and again and again and again and again. And it just kept going back and forth into the next month of August. And so, but then the craziest day came on July 12th when the Soviet 5th Guards Tank Army launched. They made an attack against the advancing the 2nd SS Panzer Corps that was trying to break through the final line, and it was the largest tank battle in history. There was almost no artillery or aerial support. It was just a bunch of tanks that were just shooting at each other in a wide open field. But because the German tanks were a lot better designed, they absolutely smashed the Soviet tanks. And they almost broke through the final line of Soviet defenses, but because they did not see that attack coming out of nowhere, the attack stalled, and they failed to break through the final line of defense at Kursk. But then the next day, Hitler found out that the Allies were invading Sicily, and they were gaining ground very fast. And so, him being typical Hitler made a knee-jerk decision to suddenly halt offensive operations at Kursk and then withdraw troops to deal with the invasion. But of course, General von Rundstedt, who was the German officer in charge of the attack at Kursk, was like, no, we can't do this. We are so close to breaking their line wide open. But he was like, no, we're halting the offensive operations, and I'm pulling back troops to deal with it. Rundstedt, however, was like, no, we have to fight them here. So he rallied what forces were remaining and attempted to carry on the fight for as long as they could, because they were just so close to getting this major victory over the Red Army that could shift the whole war in their favor. But by then it was too late, as the Soviets unveiled their final offensive and struck back with a vengeance, and all remaining German forces around Kursk were completely routed, and it was a complete disaster. So that was it. Now, of course, the war on the Eastern Front was far from over, but after the battles of Stalingrad and Kursk, the Wehrmacht basically had no hope of regaining another offensive. They just slowly kept retreating and losing more and more ground until Berlin finally fell in 1945. Now, so the question then is, how did Hitler fail so badly? Well, there's a couple reasons. One reason was that the Soviet Union Russia itself and all Eastern Europe is really freaking huge. Like, just look on a map. It's insane. And it was arguably too large and too populous for the Wehrmacht to invade while they were tied down across Europe and North Africa. And plus, Hitler's idea of a race war turned the whole population of Eastern Europe against him. The whole population. And not only that, but Hitler also exerted far too much control of the Wehrmacht strategy and refused to plan for winter and changed battle plans completely on a whim and made knee-jerk reactionary decisions based on developments that were happening all around. And he also had very little faith in his generals and manipulated them into obedience, mainly by exploiting their disagreements and personal grudges. And, of course, he was way too impatient, which proved especially disastrous at Stalingrad, as he diverted way too many troops and resources to capture a city that did not have a lot of strategic importance at all. And this caused the Wehrmacht to suffer losses in other areas, particularly in North Africa. And, of course, finally, he gambled way too many troops to break the Red Army's line at Kursk. And the Allied invasions of Europe caused Hitler to pull away even more resources from the Eastern Front, allowing the Red Army to push back the Wehrmacht even further. And overall, just too many lives and resources were wasted on the Eastern Front for the Wehrmacht to ever mount an effective counteroffensive, and thus it was only a matter of time before Hitler would commit suicide in his bunker. And that's all I got.
All right. Thank you. Very good. We'll now talk about the church in Nazi Germany.
All right. So I originally chose this topic because while studying the Third Reich and Nazi Germany, the Holocaust, I was wondering, where was the church? Why didn't they do more? What were they doing? But before we jump into that, a little background knowledge. So Christianity's views of the Jews. So basically when Christianity first started, it wasn't its own separate religion, it was a sect of Judaism. But after the First Jewish-Roman War, they eventually separated, and after that there was some tension between the religions. Christians started to blame Jews for Jesus' death instead of the Romans. The Crusades brought violence not only against the Muslims but also Jews. And then Martin Luther himself, a very esteemed German theologian, in his book Against the Jews and Their Lies, called Jews parasites, and he even called upon people to burn down synagogues and homes. So Christianity, by no stretch of the imagination, started Nazi ideas, but they may have planted some seeds. They may have been the reason why they were able to develop so well in Germany. And as for Hitler's view of Christianity, he did not like Christianity, along with a lot of his leaders. He viewed it as a weak religion because it values humility, love, gentleness, all things that Hitler really did not value. And he kind of saw taking away the religion as counterproductive, so he wanted to allow the people to keep their religion as long as the church conformed to his ideas, or at least stayed out of his politics. So a little background information about the Protestant church's handling of this. One of the main events was the Arian paragraph, and when applied to the church, this would basically mean kicking out everyone who was converted from Judaism from the pulpit, so kicking out all the pastors that had their roots in Judaism. And this is where the split occurred. The Deutsch Christians, the German Christians, they tried to implement this basically out of loyalty for their new regime. It's interesting, though, because the Nazis were not pressuring the church to do this. It was rather on their own accord that they were like, we want to do this to show loyalty. So this is where part of the danger sneaks in, is when the nationalism starts to become injected into the church. And fortunately, there was an opposite of the Deutsch Christians, which would be Niemöller's Confessing Church. And the Confessing Church basically looked at the Nazi ideas, and they were like, this does not align with church ideas, does not align with Jesus' teaching. So they got it right. As for the Catholic Church, right off the bat, Pope Pius XI was very weary of Nazism. He spoke out against it, and Catholics were told not to join the Nazi Party in the beginning. If you showed up in Nazi uniform to a church ritual, you were asked to leave. It was kind of definitely against it. And this kind of changed in the Concordat in 1933, which was an agreement between the Catholic Church and the Pope that as long as Hitler did not impose himself and did not limit the freedoms of the Catholic Church, then the Catholic Church would stay out of his politics. But Pope Pius X, the 11th anyways, sent a letter to be read all throughout the Catholic churches in Germany on Palm Sunday. And it was basically warning the members of the churches to not idolize race and state. So be wary of like where you're placing your heart. But the boldness of Pope Pius XI was greatly contrasted by Pope Pius XII. Pope Pius XII is really criticized for his lack of action towards the Third Reich's atrocities. Even after Polish priests were slaughtered, Jewish people were appealing on his doorstep. International Jewish organizations were calling him, asking him to speak out against this, to use his voice for good. And yet little to no Vatican voice was heard at all during the time of like the war and the Holocaust. So now we have like a little bit of the background information, and I just wanted to kind of see how they handled some events as a church and how Christians handle this. And one of those was the T4 program. So before the concentration camps with eliminating like other races, Hitler kind of tried to glean out people from his own German people, and those would be the disabled. This poster right here, it's basically saying that this disabled man, he cost the Volk, the German people, 60,000 Reichstag for his life. Therefore, his cost is too great to country, and he should be mercifully killed. The church looked at this and immediately they were like, this does not go well with our value of life, so we need to stop this. They used their voice to speak out, public opposition grew, and Hitler publicly halted the T4 program. Now, it didn't really halt, it kind of secretly went away, but at the same time, the church used their voice for positive change. Now, this was contrasted by the church's handling of the Nuremberg racial laws. So, of course, the Nuremberg racial laws were the start of identity papers to prove the purity of race. And one of the ways to do that was to have 2 or more family members who were baptized to avoid the J for Jew on their identity papers. So, interestingly enough, this put the church in a position of power because they could provide the baptism certificates. And instead of speaking out against this racial profiling, the only documents we have from this time are churches complaining about the workload. So not the best use of their voice there. And as for an individual Christian who represents one side is Jared Kittel. He's a well-renowned scholar of New Testament studies. He was an esteemed theologian, and he was a famous preacher. But instead of speaking out against the Nazis when confronted with the anti-Jewish laws, he was like, well, the German people have to do what they have to do to protect the well-being, to protect the German culture, to protect the German people. So that requires anti-Jewish laws, and that is okay to follow. So that's
by the way, Kittel is very famous for a whole study on words of the New Testament. People still use it.
That's interesting.
Today. It was in German, it's been translated into English.
Oh, okay.
It's just called Kittel's dictionary.
Yeah. Is it trustworthy?
Yeah, it's multi-volume. I mean, everybody uses it.
That's crazy.
Bring up that part.
Yeah. So Kittel is kind of contrasted by Kurt Gerstein. He was a devout Protestant, and originally he spoke out against the anti-Christian ideas in the SS, and this landed him in a camp. But due to family ties, he got out of camp and somehow landed a position in the SS. His life changed when one day his superior was like, hey, Kurt, I got something real cool to show you. And so Kurt found himself witnessing the intentional killing of Jews, like stuffed in a van, and I think the diesel fumes, that's how they killed him at that camp. And he immediately tried to end it. He saw the injustice, and he started to destroy Zyklon B tablets. He started to search for outsiders to get the news out. He spoke to a Swedish diplomat, a Vatican representative, but unfortunately his story ends with being captured by the French, charged with war crimes, and he died in prison. So, I don't know, they probably didn't believe him. I don't have the specifics on that. Yeah. So in conclusion, there was some good actions done by Christians in the church, but then there was some not so good actions. There's a contrast between people who follow the Nazi ideas as Christians, and there was some who spoke out against it, harbored Jews, and things of that nature. So one of the most important things when we study back on history is how we can apply it into the future. And one of the things to learn from this is that the church cannot be tied to nationalism. Its first allegiance must be to God, and then not to country. And also it's important to analyze the political and social happenings that are going on through a biblical lens and reading the Bible in context and applying that, and then using their voice to promote biblical change, or at least uphold biblical ideas in the society that they're in. So yeah, thanks guys. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Very good. Our next presentation is about propaganda during World War II.
Do you want the rest?
Sure.
Keep all of them.
This is all propaganda.
It seems like
all propaganda.
It is.
Yeah, it's Jewish propaganda.
I'm here to indoctrinate you.
oh, well, that's bold.
So excited.
Normally propagandists try to hide that fact. But go ahead.
Well,
Nasty.
exactly. You gotta think about it.
It's reverse
This
psychology.
is reverse psychology. So, what is propaganda? Webster Dictionary says it's information, especially of biased or misleading nature, used to promote or publicize a particular political cause or point of view. And then everyone's favorite propaganda Nazi, Joseph Goebbels, said the essence of propaganda consists in winning people over to an idea sincerely so
Should it be
vitally.
virtually?
I think it should be virtually.
Vitally?
I don't know. Autocorrect. That in the end they succumb to it utterly and can never escape it. Which I thought to be kind of scary. But that's just me.
Don't go be scared.
Let's see. So this is Nazi propaganda. As you can see, it looks a little scary. Well, it's kind of confusing because Hitler looks really nice there. He looks like
He
somebody.
loves the children.
Yeah,
See,
Probably was really nice.
See, it says the children
I don't know what it says.
love their Fuhrer. Do they love the Fuhrer? Yes, of course they recognize him.
See, don't you want to hire him to babysit your children? He looks so sweet there, but then here he looks a little less sweet. I don't,
Looks like the train was a bold hero of Germany.
yeah, I don't know that I want that kind of guy to babysit my children.
I'm literally picturing someone actually getting.
I am too. It's pretty great. let's make a care.com for neo-Nazis.
Oh boy.
I'm gonna make so much money on that. Oh, but
Views expressed here do not represent
are you kidding me? We could make
the
bank.
views of Southeastern University.
No, not
and their
Southeastern
professor.
University.
Okay, go ahead.
But as you can see, the ones for like Germans are nice looking, like colorful, and they make you feel good. But
The guy
then,
in the upper left-hand corner looks like an all-right guy.
yeah, he looks pretty cool. He looks
Hitler
pretty cool.
Youth.
Very blonde and fit and
Very blonde.
white. And basically me, but not at all. Yeah. Yeah. And then the Jewish ones are kind of scarier looking. This one kind of freaked me out. You guys probably can't see, but it's a bunch of stars of David in there.
Oh.
It's kind of
So
creepy.
it's an infection.
I guess so.
Microbes or something.
I can't read what that says because I don't read German.
Very small.
Yeah, I should have made it bigger. But Hitler just looked so good in this picture, I had to capture him at his best angle. So,
Just looks like
Yeah.
evil.
yeah.
Evil
So a little bit about Nazi propaganda. It was head up by the Reich Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda. They put it in the title. So they're really not trying to trick people.
No, it's just right there.
It's just right
It
there.
is what it is.
It is what it is, yep.
That's kind of weird how Goebbels straight up said, "We're trying to indoctrinate you, you know that, right?"
Yeah, he was a little outspoken on his indoctrination ideas. There were a lot of quotes, which are in my paper, but not presented in this slideshow. It was yeah.
I don't know why I clapped.
She clapped it. It's not in this presentation. Either that or she's clapping for Joseph Goebbels. I hope
I
it's
was
the
like, my
previous.
hands just wanted to go together.
Either way,
I don't know where that went. Oops. But it was aimed to get the Nazi message out through books, art, music, theater, film, and radio. Specifically radio, that was Joseph Goebbels' favorite way. And it created an atmosphere that was tolerant against the Jews and anyone else who wasn't specifically German, of German descent. Yeah, they made the Jews out to be subhuman, or not subhuman. They dehumanized them, basically. And then parasites with no home, as we can see here. Yeah. But now, this is American propaganda. Well,
Wait a minute,
specific.
we're Americans. We don't have propaganda.
Heck no, we
Come
don't.
on, gang.
We have better propaganda.
All out for Uncle Sam.
Yeah. So as you can see, ours is a lot happier and cuter, and not as indoctrinating. It's more just like pointing out things than indoctrination. And using Disney characters.
Uncle Walt.
Uncle Walt. There should have been an Uncle Walt one. Right?
Education for death.
Yeah, that's a
That
short.
seems rather not ominous.
I like that one. It's funny. Well, actually, I like the Furious Face the best. But
Oh, yeah.
Education for Death is my
See
second.
Kyle right in the Furious Face. There's a song.
Yeah, it won. No, wait. Yeah, I think it won a Grammy that year.
Sure did.
Yeah, The Furious Face won an Academy Award
Of course.
in
Can't go
1942.
wrong. Oscar loves that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a funny song though. I wish I could pull it up and watch it.
If we have time, I'll play it with you.
It's fun. But American Propaganda was
I do.
it was called the Committee on Public Information, which doesn't have propaganda in the title. So who's really winning here?
It's good.
This is why the Nazis lost the war. It worked well. Propaganda worked really well to unite people in World War I. And then I have a quote that says, "America went under censorship during the First World War without even realizing it." Because, yeah, it worked really well in World War I. So when World War II came around, they were like, okay, well, this worked well the first time. And the second part of my paper is specifically about Disney's efforts in World War II. And so the day of Pearl Harbor, he got a whole committee together and dedicated a whole part of the studio, the Disney Defense Films Division. Well, that was before Pearl Harbor. But then once Pearl Harbor happened, he amped it up a lot more. And he produced a lot of films for the government at cost, never making a dime off them. And he felt that was his patriotic duty for the war. Yeah.
Uncle Walt.
Yep. It was these films were 93% of the studio's output during the war.
So Uncle Walt didn't make much money during the war.
Nope. And he was already in a decline because Bambi and Pinocchio weren't able to be shown in Europe. So he had lost a little bit of money on those.
So look how far his company's come now.
Yeah.
But he's dead.
Yeah.
But his legacy survived.
Yeah. Just a little bit.
Okay.
And then Dear Furious Face. I'm not done yet, Madeline. Stop trying to silence me.
Wow.
I'm gonna keep the platform as long as I want to, okay? So, yeah, Dear Furious Face won Academy Award for Best Short Film. Oh, I did include a thing, so we can watch it.
There you go.
Yeah,
I wish they had the
Well,
Nazi
it's
films.
not clickable.
yeah,
That's
they
all
do.
right.
That would be
We'll
fun.
look at it later. We have other papers we have to do.
Oh, I thought I was the only one.
I can email it to you. Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay. Now she's going to clap, see?
You said okay. Sorry.
See? Yeah, it's just like Pavel. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, well, I like to know that, see, they're gone, but I like to think they've gone to a better place.
Thanks.
There we go. A pacifist and a fascist walk into a bar.
Don't forget the communists too.
And the communists.
Yeah, and the communists.
Alright, well, I actually have the same topic as Jacob, and so he did a really great job on his presentation. So I won't go too much into Bonhoeffer's biography, but this is just an excerpt from my paper that desperation led one German man to discover a potent revolutionary voice within himself and led another man into the drowning depths of despotism during the 1930s and the 40s. The first being Bonhoeffer and the second obviously being Hitler. So, who is Bonhoeffer? As Eric Metaxas stated in the title of his book, pastor, martyr, prophet, spy. Bonhoeffer was literally just one of my favorite theologians and favorite people in history to study because he wasn't necessarily a leader of a movement, but his work that he has done has influenced so many people afterwards, even like after his death. And so he was doing the right thing, even though the right thing wasn't getting him anywhere, really. In fact, it got him in prison and a host of other things. But first, I want to tell you what inspired him to do what he did. He went to he went to America and then to New York City to do some work in churches and stuff like that, and he experienced racism, he said, for like the first real time where he could see it visibly. He went to a restaurant with some of his African American buddies, and the wait staff refused to wait on the African American friends of his. So he had never really seen that before, even though I'm sure he had seen at least some sort of, racism against Jews, but maybe it wasn't as in his face, obviously, as what it was in Hitler's Germany. So, Hitler constricted the freedom of people, especially in the church. He wouldn't let, he wasn't even really Christian, so it was frustrating, but he wouldn't let certain things be said in the church. And so it was really hinging and not prohibiting, but it was making his job as a pastor difficult. And so, when he went across to America, he could see things that was happening in Germany, and he knew he couldn't stay. He said he didn't really know why he couldn't stay at first, but he knew he wouldn't. And then he decided on, in one of his letters, he said, "I would have no right to participate in the reconstruction of Christian life in Germany after the war if I think this is from my paper, that's why it says that. If I didn't share in the trials of this time with my people," that's what Bonhoeffer said. So, really, on the ship, he thinks he's going to be able to participate in Reconstruction, but he would never see the reconstruction of Germany, ultimately. And pretty much he was being led to the slaughter, and I think that's characteristic of Christ. He did this to come and die. So, what could possibly make a pacifist fight? When you say that he's a spy and then you say he's a pacifist, that's a paradox. It doesn't really make sense. But even though Bonhoeffer was a pacifist in his mentality and his heart, he had to take certain measures to ensure that Christ's name could be proclaimed, and that I think just obviously if you were in Germany when people were getting slaughtered, that you would have to take action as well, and that would be manifested in hopefully like a similar way as Bonhoeffer. It was radical, but it wasn't radical if you look at the circumstances. It was necessary. So what Bonhoeffer did ultimately was join the Abwehr. I accidentally spelled it wrong. It's like ABE. There's lots of letters. But
Avar conspiracy to kill Hitler. Unfortunately, nothing was successful. There was a bomb underneath the desk for some big conference, and he had aligned himself with some general, and they were planning it, but I think half of the bomb didn't go off or something like that.
Bomb went off, but the table was so strong, Hitler was on the other side of the support under the table.
Basically,
Part of
the
it,
table
yeah.
took most of the explosion.
Is this the Valkyrie assassination?
Yeah, it's the same thing. They had made a movie called Valkyrie.
And Tom Cruise.
Tom Cruise in it. Yeah,
Oh.
that was showing this attempt.
The ending is disturbing, though. It straight up shows all the conspirators getting assassinated. Not
Well,
assassinated, but executed.
Lord. Instead of it killing Hitler, though, ultimately it actually encouraged Hitler because he didn't die, so he thought that he was invincible. So Bonhoeffer got arrested because he was smuggling Jews out to Switzerland, and he ended up going to prison in 1943, and he had just gotten engaged to a woman named Maria von something. I don't know how to say her last name, but it was really sad, and he did a lot of work with the Confessing Church, and they ended up silencing him and shutting down the Confessing Church because it didn't match Hitler's ideology. But then that's when he got arrested for his work with the Jews and everything. And from prison, he wrote letters and papers from prison. And it's so inspirational. It's something that I read in high school, just like excerpts of it, which is vastly different from Mein Kampf, but shows these two men just worldview and ideology. And I think that Bonhoeffer's obviously is far superior to Hitler's. So there are some problems, and Jacob talked about this in researching Bonhoeffer. He made a lot of statements and stuff like that, but truly he never finished his sentence. So you'll find that a lot of people, like political leaders, writers, theologians, pastors, just a lot of people try to put Bonhoeffer in a box and write conclusive statements when you can't take somebody who didn't live out their entire life and form all of their theology and say huge sweeping statements about them. And that's something that if you read like the critiques on Eric Metaxas's biography, I've heard it's a great entertaining book and everything, but as someone put in their critique, it's as if Metaxas is trying to make a German priest from the World War II era into a modern conservative Republican. And that's just, you can't do that. It's a historical fallacy to say that Bonhoeffer would agree with Republicans today. So, anyways, I think it's so important not to commit historical fallacies. Here's a picture of the two men. He just is such a great guy.
Some people kind of do that a lot, though. They try to say, oh, well, this historical figure lines up with this ideology and all that.
Like Martin Luther.
Yeah. Yeah. So, anyways, these are the two guys. I included a video from Eric Metaxas's kind of like book advertisement. It's like 2 minutes, but I don't think we'll have time to watch it. But it's actually really cool. It just kind of says some of Bonhoeffer's quotes. And these are some of my favorite quotes. When it ends, it says, "When Christ calls a man, he bids him come and die." And unfortunately, that's exactly what Bonhoeffer had to do because his name got exposed in the documents that Hitler read about the conspiracy. And so Hitler directly ordered everyone in the Avar conspiracy's execution. So he was hung on April 9th, 1945. Which was literally just weeks before the Americans took over that concentration camp. So it's tragic. But just remember that silence in the face of evil is evil itself. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak, and not to act is to act. So when your opportunity arrives one day to speak and to act, I would encourage you to do that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Very good. We still have a little bit of time, so What's that? I think so. Well, everybody who's.
$30 years from now.
30 years.